Welcome to the Native American Civil Rights Podcast. I'm joined today with Sebja, Ashley, and Connor. My name is Brianna, and today we will discuss the relationship between the U.S. and Native Americans. The injustices against American Indians continue. Connor, can you explain how voting accessibility is hindered in the Native community?
Hi Brianna, thanks for having me. Tribes are nations within a nation. The Constitution and treaties are the supreme law of the land. The Marshall Trilogy are Supreme Court decisions that set precedent for legal injustices towards the natives. In Johnson v. McIntosh, the Supreme Court decided private citizens could not purchase lands from Native Americans. Justice Marshall explained that Europeans conquered this land, therefore they have the right to rule the land and its inhabitants. The doctrine of discovery was established as a legal precedent to justify genocide against natives. In Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, 1831, the Supreme Court claimed the Cherokee Nation was a dependent nation, thus establishing a ward-to-guardian relationship in Worcester v. Georgia, 1832. The Supreme Court swings and reaffirms that tribes are nations, therefore only the federal government can negotiate with the natives. The U.S. gave dual citizenship to natives after World War I because the U.S. recognized the overwhelming number of native soldiers. The self-determination era began in the 1930s with John Collier, the Commissioner for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. The Indian Reorganization Act, aka the Indian New Deal, aimed to reverse the effects of assimilation. Tribes could manage their natural resources, however this did not apply to Oklahoma, Hawaii, and Alaska. Unfortunately, the Ultimate or Dawes Act made it hard for tribes to recover, thus leaving checkerboard reservations. States prevented natives to vote. In 1962, New Mexico set up voting polls on the Navajo reservation and provided translators. Recently, Utah has started mail-by voting on the reservations. This might not seem like a big deal, but most of the Native American population on reservations do not speak English. Utah argues the natives could drive to the next available county, however it's a 400-mile round trip. Preventing natives to vote on decisions that will affect their community is a legal injustice set from the beginning.
Yeah. Taking land from natives is nothing new. Natives have the highest rate of poverty. Some communities live in extreme poverty. Natives have the highest rates in teen suicide out of any other ethnic group. Native women experience the most murder and disappearances than any other group. Natives have the highest rate in diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. There is inadequate funding for health care and education on the reservations. Historical trauma is a cumulative emotion and psychological wounding of an individual or generation caused by a traumatic experience or event. Historical trauma is the manifestation of emotions and actions that stem from this perceived trauma. Colonization. Native culture and identity is connected to the land. Black Hill is a sacred place for the Sioux Nation. The Indian Claims Commission Act allowed tribes to sue the U.S. for violating treaties. The Sioux Nation were awarded money for the violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty, but the Sioux Nation refuses to accept the money. The Sioux Nation say they are not selling the Black Hills. They want to legally reclaim these Black Hills. And here are a few videos.
Was never for sale.
The Black Hills are very important to the Sioux Indian tribes because they are the spiritual center of the Sioux people.
For tribal attorney Mario Gonzalez, the compensation fund is the embodiment of Indian mistreatment by the U.S. government, and the taking of the Black Hills was the gravest sin of all.
The Sioux tribes have always maintained that confiscation is illegal and that the tribes must have some of their ancestral lands returned to them.
Broken.
There's a long history of treaties having been made with Indian tribes that were broken. Some would say that no treaty was ever kept with an Indian tribe.
Ross Swimmer served as a special trustee for American Indians during the George W. Bush administration.
It's been a psychological issue for all the Sioux tribes all this time, and much of that land is still owned by the federal government. And so the tribes are simply saying, well, wait a minute, you took our land, we want the land back.
These legal injustices have excused the U.S. to ignore Native Americans. Native culture and religion is still being practiced. Native communities are resilient. In fact, 2 out of 3 natives are living in the city. Here in the Bay, we have Native community centers in San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco. Assimilation is still manifesting itself within the Native community. There are interviews of natives trying to blend in. As a Peruvian, As an outsider, I can sympathize with Native Americans. Nobody likes to stand out, especially in your own territory. My sister Carla Bravo is a student in the University of Idaho. She studies with Native Americans in Idaho, and she's on the phone. And here's Carla Bravo. Now, Carla, I want to talk about the assimilation that a lot of people don't really recognize or like to talk about. What can you say about that? How did it really start?
Well, it started way back in the day. Forget what year it was. But it started with the Pope. He wrote down this thing called Papal Bull. And in the Papal Bull, it's claimed that Christian Europeans that would go out into the New World to claim land for their country would have to go out and Christianize. It is their godly duty to go out and Christianize the people of that new land and to set up trade for their original country. This set up groundwork for Doctrine of Discovery and for Manifest Destiny. Now we all know that Christopher Columbus ended up going to the Caribbean, and he committed acts of genocide against the natives out there. To this day, we don't know how many survivors of Taino descent there are in Puerto Rico. There is a book of accounts of the genocidal acts that Christopher Columbus and his crew committed in the Caribbean. It is written by a priest called Bartolomé de las Casas. And this set up the Black history of Spain. And the priest debated with a philosopher in Spain many years after Christopher Columbus died. And they argued about the inhumane injustices towards the natives. And remember, during this time, there was the African slave trade. So, Bartolomé de las Casas was arguing that natives were not as barbaric as the Africans, and that they could have an opportunity to change the hearts of the natives, to Christianize them, and to civilize them. Today, it's 2/3 of natives living in the city, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, there's going to be a lot of mixing of the cultures when you're living in a place for a long time, okay? Different tribes mixing with each other. Of course, there's going to be, mixing with, other races, like white people, black people, Asian people. It's just going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the people that you see today in the city, okay?
I see.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming on here, and we hope to hear from you again.
Right.
I think that conversation was great. I personally learned a lot, and I wish I could actually know even more. And I think us being in Palo Alto, living on Ohlone land, because this is an Ohlone territory, we should know a lot more, and I think we should think about it more and talk about it more in schools. We should be made more aware of these things. And an old word of wisdom from the Cherokee tribe that I think really ties in to what we're talking about today. It is called Old Tassel, and it reads, "Much has been said of what the want of what you term civilization among the Indians. Many proposals have been made to us to adopt your laws, your religion, your manners, and your customs. We do not see the propriety of such a reformation. We should be better pleased if we could actually see the good effects of these doctrines in your own practices rather than hearing you talk about them or reading your newspaper on such subjects. You say, for example, why do not the Indians till the ground and live as we do? May we not ask with equal propriety, why do not the white people hunt and live as we do?"
Being a Peruvian girl and having Peruvian relatives, Brianna has first-hand experience about American Indian assimilation. I'm from Turkey and I moved to the U.S. only a year ago, so it is hard for me to understand the Native American plight. That's why I wanted to know how the American Indian community felt about their assimilation. A Cherokee descendant, Elson Adele Hedgecock, wrote a poem in 2004 called America I Sing You Back. The poem is about the relationship between Native Americans and the U.S. trying to push them out of their home. Her writing the poem recently shows the government is still overlooking American Indian needs.
My song comforted her as she battled my reason, broke my long-held footing sure as any child might do. As she pushed herself away, forced me to remove myself. As I cried this country, my song grew roses in each tear's fall. My blood-veined rivers painted pipestone quarries, circled canyons while she made herself maiden fine. But here I am, here I am, here I remain high on each and every peak, carefully rumbling her great underbelly, prepared to pour forth singing. And sing again I will, as I have always done.
The author wrote about how American Indians were here first, they respected the land, and lived here peacefully until Americans came. She wrote about the perseverance of the people, of their ability to never be silenced, and their love for their home.
So thank you so much for joining us, and see you next time on the Native American Civil Rights Podcast.